Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce and welcome Dr. David Hayes, the head of the Theory and Architecture group at the new quantum computing startup, Quantinuum, which is a spinoff of Honeywell Quantum Solutions. Dr. Hayes is a Lobo. He is an Albuquerque native and did his undergraduate and master's studies here, both in education and in physics. And then went on to get his PhD in physics at the University of Maryland, where he received his PhD in 2012. And after some stints in Australia as postdoc, he ultimately saw what was going on in quantum computing and helped to start up this new startup. I don't want to steal much of Dave's thunder, but I just want to tell you a little bit about my experience. How I got to know Dave. Dave came back to UNM after a bit of student teaching, where that was his original goal, was to teach high school, and discovered he really wanted to do physics, and came back. And I know he was really inspired by Dr. Bernd Basilic and other faculty. And he ended up in my senior year of course in quantum mechanics, which I had never taught before. And but you know, I made it hell for all the students, but Dave, you know, there's every once in a while you have the pleasure as a teacher of discovering somebody, this diamond in the rough who was absolutely incredible, and said, Dave, you need to do an honors thesis. I had never done an honors thesis with anyone. I did my honors thesis supervision with Dave, which then became you know, one of the key papers for group 2 element quantum computing, because as you know, and Dave, I said, Dave, you have to leave, you have to go somewhere else. And he went to Maryland and started his career from there. So we're really pleased to see Dave back here and tell us more about his story, which is a really non-traditional story. Many of us here in New Mexico don't always, are traditional students, go through different paths, but those paths can lead us to become leaders. And so we'll hear a little bit more from Dave. So welcome, David Hayes.
All right, glad to be here with the class of 2022, in person even. So, like you heard, my name is David Hayes, and I grew up here in Albuquerque and went from UNM from 1997 to 2007, getting degrees in education and physics. And these days, I'm a principal theorist and an R&D manager at Quantinuum, a startup quantum computing company, and I'm honored to be here. So, some of you are leaving school. Seen the news lately? We got a lot of problems, and it's on you. You have to save us, because we obviously can't do it. Or just stay here in school and don't worry about it. It'll take care of itself. But those problems won't take care of themselves, actually. This is a graduation speech, but I'm not a life coach, and I don't know exactly what you should do to have a wonderful life. All I know is what worked for me. So instead of giving specific advice, I want to remind everybody here that you people are tough and you're problem solvers. And you can figure out how to make a wonderful life for yourself. But I do want to warn you that it's hard work. So you better get started. I've been in the problem solving business for a long time now. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, well, that sounds really fun. And then walk away from that problem. And then almost without fail, some time goes by and I eventually hear about somebody making progress on that hard problem. So next time you hear somebody say, oh, that sounds really hard, remember, somebody's out there tinkering with ideas and chipping away at that problem, undaunted and making real progress. And you can do that too. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about how I ended up where I am. I haven't covered some of the highlights, but I'll go over it again. And I want to emphasize that my path was not the result of me succeeding at following a plan. Rather, it was the result of wanting to work on a problem and then taking on whatever challenges were limiting my progress. So I jumped from teaching to science And from theory to experiment, back to theory, then to design, back to theory, and then even management, which is almost an anti-goal for a lot of scientists, management. But it too is something that needs to be done well and is absolutely crucial to a big project. So I spent 10 years here at UNM, 10 out of the 20 that I lived in Albuquerque. And I lived all over the place over here. And I took nearly every intro level class that was offered. And I never imagined it getting old. But I eventually got a letter from the university saying I had to pick a major. And so I enrolled in the College of Ed. And I was going to teach high school physics. And they make you take a few physics classes. And so once I started, I got hooked. So I finished that education degree as quickly as I could and jumped right over to the physics department. When I wasn't in the physics building, I was at the library tutoring physics, CAPS, you all know it. Or I was at the coffee shop working problems. As Ivan said, my senior year quantum mechanics instructor, Ivan, invited me to join his research group where we worked on theoretical proposals for building quantum computers, something that ended up being a big part of my life. And I spent the last 18 years trying to make it happen. I eventually got my undergraduate physics degree here and went into the master's program. And after my master's, I wanted to shake things up a little bit. And I went to Maryland and got closer to the immediate problems holding back quantum computing and enrolled in an experimental PhD program. Hooked up with a trapped ion quantum computing group, which is one of the more mature platforms for that type of research. In Maryland, I didn't study quantum information. I had to study optical system design, electrical circuits, ultra-high vacuum systems, lasers, and control software. And it was pretty different from what I'd imagined when thinking about being a physicist. And it was hard. My advisor, Chris Monroe, was wonderful and helped me along, helped me over the finish line. So after a few years of long days and nights, I started to master that experiment. And I eventually got to where new theory was needed to describe what we were doing, which I could do because of my experience here. So I was able to carve out a special role as our group's theorist. And that ended up getting another professor's attention, leading me to my postdoc in Sydney, Australia in a quantum control lab. And I had the time of my life down there in Australia. It's like too much fun. But I eventually realized the university trapped ion labs were limited. And it wasn't long before I left my postdoc and went to industry to try to build a real quantum computer. My first job in industry was a bust. Our team was dysfunctional. We couldn't get anything done. And I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake in going to industry. But just as that gig really started to crash and burn, another opportunity sprang up. And I started at Honeywell with about 20 others, mostly scientists. What happened at Honeywell was kind of special. It was kind of a startup inside of a big company. All the scientists had about the same amount of experience. We weren't professors or famous or anything. But it was awesome because it put everybody on the same level. So it was all about the ideas instead of being dominated by a few personalities. We had the luck of having some great support inside of Honeywell. From the managers all the way up to the CEO. And I give those early program managers a lot of credit for what they did. Successfully managing a big effort takes a lot of skill, careful planning, patience, and fortitude. Like Ivan said, we're not part of Honeywell anymore. We were spun off and merged with a company from the UK. The new company is Continuum. When we started, I was the only one with much theory experience. So I put my theory hat on and I haven't worked in the lab much at all in the last 6 years, even though my PhD was in experimental physics. These days, I lead the theory and architecture teams for the hardware branch of our company. And I get to do some physics, but there's a lot of managing going on. I didn't plan for this management role, but I see a need for it to give our team the best chance possible, especially after watching my last team implode. I find myself serving as a bridge between experiments, theory, and design work. Again, finding a place where my unique path in science can be most impactful. I don't know if what I'm working on will ultimately be successful, but I'm going to make sure I give it every chance I can. There are no guarantees, but that's life. And right now I'm having a hell of a time giving it all I got with a great group of people. Despite what I originally wanted to happen, I didn't become the best theorist to come out of UNM. And I didn't become the best ion trapper to come out of Maryland. But I am making a run at being the best theory and architecture manager for a trapped ion quantum computing startup company in the southwestern United States. It's a lot of fun. All this is to say that I hope you go and perform well out there, no matter where you find yourself, no matter where you find yourself. If you want to crack the code on hard scientific questions, get after it, follow your nose, and be ready to change course. You usually can't plan that out. Otherwise, the problem would already be solved. You want to use your physics background in another technical field, get out there and get started. Start cleaning up the planet or developing cures for disease, whatever. Or if you want to get out of science altogether, do it now. Start thinking about what you should be putting your efforts towards. Be it your family and community, an art form, a business, good government, anything. You have a professional scientific training now. You know how to pick problems apart, including the very hard problem of living a fulfilling life. It's not easy. I gave up on my first career choice. I got the degree, but I never taught a day of school in my life. But work on your life. And remember, there aren't any rules. Put your own spin on things, because that's the only way to make a unique and new contribution. Think hard about what you want out of life, and then start trying. Bob Dylan said, don't go find yourself, go make yourself. If you do that and do it well, I think you'll do fine, and the world will be better off with you in it. Maybe I sound like I'm telling you to be a workaholic. I sort of am. But only on the things you really want to do. It doesn't have to be your job, for example. Maybe it sounds like not a lot of fun. But my experience is, it's when people slack off and don't bother to get things right, is when people suffer the most. It's when people put in hard work, when they really start having a good time. To all of you continuing in physics, I want to tell you one last story. During my first week in industry, the new boss gathered all the newbies for a meeting and asked us to go around and name our hero and say something about him. People mentioned names like Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, Abraham Lincoln. I don't remember what was said about those people. Not even a little bit. One guy in the room named as his hero the everyday worker in science. And he talked about someone that put in an honest day, performed well, treated others with respect, and helped move the world in the right direction. And I still remember that. But I don't remember what was said about Einstein. Congratulations to y'all. And remember that no matter what happens after this, no one can take this away from you. You did it.